Belmont race here?
Well, this is they call it the Test of Champions, and it's because it is the mile-and-a-half race, and it's run at Belmont, and Belmont has a unique nickname for the racetrack. People like to call Belmont Big Sandy, and that's because of its wide sweeping turns. This is a mile-and-a-half racetrack. It's that one big oval, and the turns are big and long, they're wide. So, it's like a lot of times you'll hear me talk, well, they got tight turns like at the Preakness and such. Here, they're big and windy, wide, so that you got a lot of time to make your moves. And it's not a tight move. You're able to, go through there, hold momentum, and come out of there. Now, the other part of it is, and the sandy part is, the surface at Belmont is a sandy surface, and it's a deep surface. And some people think that it can be a tiring racetrack, and so they always make the joke that, and why they call it the race and the Test of Champions is that horses go through that last turn, and they come out of it and they come to the stretch. They just don't have enough to finish. Because the track's a little bit tiring, they're staggering home, and you can get the upsets and so forth. The big thing about Belmont Racetrack is because of its configuration, jockeys got to remember that they're not on a normal racetrack. Mm-hmm. When they get into that final turn, if they make their move too soon, and with the big wide sweeping turn, they're coming off the turn, and they have started to move in their head at the three-quarter pole as they're going into the last turn like they would on a normal racetrack. When they hit the top of the stretch, they're in trouble. They got a quarter of a mile to go yet, okay? And a lot of times they've timed that move wrong, people that haven't raced there that often, and then halfway down their stretch, their horse is, looking for mama because they're running out of gas, and they still got a quarter of a mile to go, and they can't finish it. So the jockey is important in this race as far as tactical moves, and we'll be talking about that with one of the long shot horses when we get to it, and why he is my long shot, and I'll explain that because of this track in itself.
All right. Well, that's interesting. A deep track. Horses can get really tired. It's 12 furlongs, which is a mile and a half. Are there any other big horse races of this length?
For these horses, this may be the only time they race a mile and a half in their careers. And when they do race mile and a half races, which they do have other ones here in the United States, most of them are on turf, not dirt. This will be about the only one that will be on dirt. In Europe, they race a lot of mile-and-a-half races. But again, over in Europe, they race a lot more races on turf. It's just easier on the horses, for them not to sustain injuries. And that, let's face it, the racetrack is, it's hard. The surface, can, especially if you get a muddy track where it was a hard rain and it takes away that first layer of cushion, and you're getting to that bottom layer, and a lot of times it's gooey on the top, but you're actually feels like you're hitting concrete underneath of it, and it can take its toll on horses, and that's why we're looking at, the protection of horses and not overextending them, because this is, tough. But the horses that do race these races on a regular basis, they're bred for distance. And that's, in they're breeding with their mother, with their sire and dam, that they were good distance horses. And that's why everybody, when you're handicapping this race, can he get the distance? Can he get the distance? And you got to look into the breeding.
Well, I think that's the most intriguing thing about it. It's kind of like, and that's why you appreciate a Triple Crown winner more than anything else, because he pretty much did it all. And I wonder if that's when the first person 140 years ago that came up with the Belmont and the length of it, if that was thought of.
Yeah, and again, the Test of Champions, because it is the last leg, and if you're going to be the champion, you've got to get that Triple Crown. You've got to go there and do it. And I can tell you a little sidebar to back in the day, when there was a Triple Crown possibility, and they were going for it on Belmont Racetrack, always is going to be jam-packed. But you used to get back before we've had the more automated tote system. Remember when you would go to the track, and I don't know how old you actually are, Kiev. I'm older than you. I know that. Okay,
a little bit.
But you used to have the windows where there were like designated windows. There was a $2 window, a $10 window, or a $50 window, and it actually printed. That's what they printed out at that window. So if you went to a $2 window and said, "Give me $100 to win," the guy couldn't punch 100 to win on number 5. Like he does now. He was punching the $50, $2 button. He's hitting it 50 times. And back in the day, people would go and bet the horse that was going for the Triple Crown, just go to the window and get a bunch of $2 tickets. And the reason for that is because they were becoming sports memorabilia. You had a $2 win ticket on a Triple Crown winner. They wouldn't cash the ticket because the horse generally is only going to, if he's going for the Triple Crown, he's a monster horse and he's not going to pay that much, even if it was a $3 or $4 payday. They wouldn't cash that ticket. They wanted to have the souvenir. You put a $2 win ticket along with an 8x10 photo of the particular horse, and all of a sudden you stick that in a frame, you got a couple $100 sports memorabilia
right
thing, and people were doing, making profits off of that. So that was a little history lesson for you on why there were so many $2 tickets never cashed in so many Belmonts when there actually was a Triple Crown winner.
Right. Well, that's awesome. And I probably would have done the same. I mean, who wouldn't, man? Start selling some memorabilia, a big picture with a ticket. $2 ticket's worth more than you can get for your minus 110 that you probably paid on this Triple Crown winner by the time he gets to the Belmont. So there you go. Well, how in this long track, how important are these post positions then? Does it make it less important, or what are your thoughts?
In this race, the post positions are the least important of any of the 3 Triple Crown races. What is more important in this race than the other races, and the jockey's important in every race, don't get me wrong, but the jockey's got to be smart in this race. He's got to realize what the pace is, because you are going a mile and a half. You've got to deal with, if you're on the front end with a horse, you've got to rate your horse so that you've got something left. If you're somebody that's in the middle of the pack stalking, you can't let that guy go too slow on the front end because you're not going to get by him then. And then you also can't make that move too early, like I told you in the last turn, and have your horse go by and have the lead at the top of the lane and then stagger home and somebody picks him up from behind late towards the wire. So it is a very tactical race, and experience on this track is very important. And, guys that, race here on a regular basis obviously have an edge, and also horses that have raced on this racetrack have an edge because of the difference of the track surface and getting to familiarize themselves with everything at the Belmont, and that's something we'll talk about with that long shot horse.
Awesome. Well, can't wait to get into that.
I keep teasing you, man.
You're teasing the hell out of everyone. I'm just trying to pound through these questions here. Who's your long shot, Mark? No. Well, we'll get to that quick, but I guess what kind of horse is best for this race? Is it a closer, the front runners, horses with the tactical speed? Does it matter, or it just depends on the fractions?
Well, this is the thing that the most people automatically think that because it's a mile and a half, this is a race for the stone cold closers. And that's really not been the case, because too often what happens is the horses that are on the front end, because it is the mile and a half, they are conscious of the fractions. So they're racing a moderate fraction pace on the front end to actually a slow. You're very seldom going to get a suicide fractions on the front end in this race, because everybody knows you can't do that in a mile and a half race and have anything left. So oftentimes it's going to be a slower first half of a race, and that can put the stone cold closers behind the 8 ball. Now, the difference with the stone cold closers in this race, as opposed to the Kentucky Derby, that's a mile and a quarter, so we get an extra quarter of a mile. But what you do get, in addition to that extra quarter of a mile to close ground, is you're not going to navigate through 20 horses. And in the Derby, there's horses all over the place, horses that are tiring, coming back at you. You're trying to maneuver your way around horses, find a spot to get through. These races generally are smaller fields. This is generally the smallest of the three races. And in this particular year, it is. There's only 10 horses in this one. So you got a mile and a half of a race to go, and you only got 10 horses to maneuver around. You're not going to run into the road problems that you would generally have in the Kentucky Derby. So that does help the closers in that regard, but you still are subject to the pace. That's something that a closer's always going to have to deal with. But in this race, he doesn't have to deal with fractions and traffic. Traffic will not be a problem.
I got you. And there's probably nothing a closer can do. They always want to lay off the pace. They don't want to be the front runner because they're not used to that, right?
Absolutely. And if they get their horse involved too soon, they don't have enough left for the stretch. So the horses that do the best in this race, the horses on the front end, generally not the horses that win. Somebody generally will catch them. But those horses in that next flight, the stalkers or the tactical speed horses, are good. And another kind of horse that does well in the Belmont is a horse that, we might refer to as a plotter or a grinder. He's not a horse that has that one big burst move, but he has that long, sustained grind. And that has been very successful in this race. Just grinding out those, you said it's a 12-furlong race. Just keep pounding out those even fraction furlongs that the horse just keeps going. He doesn't slow up. Or a lot of times, the front runners have their speed fractions at the beginning of the race, and then they start slowing down a little bit. But because they're in the front, they're still hanging around as they're starting to go a little bit slower because the other horses are coming from behind. But that one that has that even gear and just grinds and grinds, they do well in there, and that's the kind of horses you want to look at. The stone deep cold closer that's going to come from left field. Will they hit the ticket? Yeah, oftentimes they'll be on that ticket, in the trifecta, on the bottom half and superfecta. But getting up to win, I look elsewhere.
Gotcha. So in saying that leads right into the next question. Who's going to be the front runners in this race from the get-go, leading the pace?
Well, there's going to be one horse on the front end, in my opinion, and that's going to be the number one horse, Jovia. And this is a horse that he's only got one way to race. He goes to the front, and he's going to go for as long as he can. I think he is buried way beyond belief in this race. He'll be one of those that the owners are going to get the joy of being in a Triple Crown race and the joy of hearing their horse's name leading the race. And that'll be the only joy they have because the horse will be doing the backstroke coming down the finish line.
So this horse he's overmatched here. Mile and a half's too far, and you can probably tell that from some of his previous races, I'm guessing, and his breeding, right?
And it just doesn't have the speed to carry this distance, in my opinion.
Gotcha. Well, how are the Beyer speed figures for these horses in this race? Pretty sieimilar, would you say?
Yeah, you know what? As I said, this is an average crop. This is a Triple Crown race, Kiev. We only have one horse in this race that has a Beyer's triple-digit figure. And that's really surprising because at this time of the year, you either had horses get a triple Beyer's figure, and 100 or more, in one of the prep races, or at least in the Derby or the Preakness. And the only horse that has a triple Beyer's figure is number 7, Sir Winston, and he's got a 100 Beyer figure, and that was in his last race. Everybody else, there's a lot of high 90s, but there's only one's cracked that magical mark. So it's not a dominant field, which means it makes it competitive, and it's going to come down to how this race sets up.
Gotcha. Only Sir Winston has triple. I think next was War Will at 99.
Exactly.
So, and War Will happened to draw the 9-post, and Tacitus drew the 10-post. And these are your two favorite, the two favorite horses to win this race. I think right now, War of Will is 2-1 on the early lines, the morning lines, and Tacitus is 9-5, which is almost 2-1. And as far as post position, you're not as concerned for that?
No, again, because of the